Chapter 2. A Door in the Dark. The basement lights buzzed softly, a steady electric hum that made the air feel too thin and too bright. The folding chairs formed a rough circle. Elias counted them without meaning to. 12 chairs, 8 people, a few empty seats left like mercy. The faces were familiar in the way small-town faces always were. Not close friends, not strangers. People you had seen in line at the post office, passing the feed store, sitting 2 pews behind you at a funeral. People who belonged to Ashford's daily life. They sat as if they were unsure whether the chairs were allowed to hold them. Elias stood with a paper cup of water in his hand and realized his fingers were shaking. He set the cup down and clasped his hands together instead. He did not want to appear afraid. He was afraid anyway.
"Thank y'all for comin'," he said, and heard the thinness in his own voice. I'm not sure how to do this the right way. I don't know if there is a right way."
No one laughed. No one moved. Elias looked around the circle. "I'm not here to explain what's happening. I'm here because something is happening, and because you're not alone in it." A woman in her 60s nodded once, tight and quick. A man with a work jacket kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Nurse Rena sat with her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked pale under the fluorescent lights. Elias swallowed. "If anyone wants to speak first, you can. If you don't, we can sit in silence until someone does. Silence isn't disrespect here." That was when the man in the back cleared his throat. He wasn't from Ashford. Elias knew most faces in town, and this one did not match any name on the church roll. Mid-30s, lean build, pin-straight black hair slicked back, rough hands, fingernails chewed down. He wore jeans and a plain hoodie, damp at the cuffs like he'd stepped through wet grass. "I'll go," the man said. The voice had a careful steadiness to it, as if he was holding each word by the collar to keep it from running away. Elias nodded. "Tell us your name." "Mark," he said. "I'm 33. A few people shifted, as if already making their quiet assumptions. 33 was young enough to still be in motion and old enough to have regrets. Mark's eyes moved around the circle once, quick and guarded. Then they settled on Elias. "I didn't come because I saw my dead sister," he said. "I didn't come because I heard my mom's voice. I came because what's happening here? It woke something up in me. Something I've spent years trying to bury." He let out a slow breath through his nose. "I drove in from a little ways out. I heard about this group from someone who knows someone. That's how it goes in these towns." Elias didn't interrupt. He could feel the room lean in without anyone moving. Mark rubbed his palms against his jeans once, then clasped his hands again like he didn't trust them. "I grew up in church," he said. "Catholic. I believed in God the way you believe in gravity. It's there, it exists. You don't think about it unless you fall." A few heads nodded, almost against their will. "But I lived however I wanted," Mark continued. "In my early 20s, I was partying hard. Clubs, drinking, drugs. I'm not proud of it. I'm saying it because I was the kind of person who thought belief was the same thing as being right with God." His mouth tightened. "I used to tell myself, if I die, I'll go to heaven. Because I believed. Because I wasn't. I wasn't the worst. I wasn't a monster." He looked down at his hands as if he was seeing something there. "I didn't fear God. I feared getting caught. I feared consequences. I feared losing a job, losing a relationship. But I didn't fear God." The room was so quiet, Elias could hear the fluorescent light's faint vibration. Mark lifted his eyes again. "Then one night I went to sleep. Normal night, I wasn't high, I wasn't drunk, I was sober. And the next thing I knew, I wasn't in my room anymore. Mark's voice stayed level, but Elias heard the strain under it. It was darkness, palpable. It was a darkness you could feel, the kind that would break your mind on earth. He paused, searching for words that could carry weight without breaking. I remember going down, he said, descending, like falling without air, like being dropped into a pit that didn't end. His fingers tightened around each other, and in that darkness, there were hands. I couldn't see faces, I couldn't see bodies, but I knew there were hands reaching for me, grabbing at me, like they wanted to pull me in faster. A woman in the circle whispered, "Lord, have mercy," so quietly it barely existed. Mark's jaw worked once, as if he was chewing through memory. Then I was, suspended, not standing, not sitting, just there, and the pain started. Nurse Rena had heard people describe pain in hospital rooms. She had watched people suffer, but the way Mark said pain made it sound like a living thing. Mark's eyes looked glassy, not with tears, but with the pressure of holding them back. I don't even know how to describe it without sounding insane. I've tried to make it make sense. He swallowed. It wasn't one kind of pain. It was every kind, all at once. Like every fear you've ever had turns into sensation. Like every sickness, every panic, every burn, every depression, every crushing grief. All of it becomes physical and all-consuming. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Imagine the worst pain you've ever felt. A migraine so bad you want to die. A burn, a cramp, a car accident. Multiply it until it doesn't even resemble the original thing anymore. Multiply it until your mind says, "This should kill me. This should end me." His voice thinned for the first time. But it didn't end. That's the point. It didn't end. No one spoke. No one could. Mark's breathing was controlled, measured. Here on Earth, pain has edges, he said. It comes and goes. It spikes, and then it eases. You can get relief. You can pass out. You can get medicine. Even if you're suffering, there's still hope that it will lessen. In that place, there was no relief, not a second, not a breath. The pain wasn't steady, it increased. He shook his head once, small. It was like each moment added a new weight, and you realized it was going to do that forever. Elias felt something cold move through his chest. Not fear for himself, fear for the room. Mark's voice lowered. The two worst things weren't even the pain, he said. The two worst things were hopelessness and eternity. He looked around the circle, forcing each person to hear him with their own ears. Hopelessness like a fact, he said, like gravity, like you just know there will never be a door, never an exit, never a rescue, never relief. Nothing good exists there. There's no love, no peace, no kindness, no light. He swallowed hard. And eternity. I can't explain eternity in normal words. It's not just a long time. It's the absence of time as a comfort. You know it will never end. And that knowing becomes part of the torment. And the torment just increased and increased every moment I was there. That entire place is just death over and over, dying for eternity. The room sat in that for a moment. A few people cried quietly. Someone held their own arms as if trying to keep themselves from shaking apart. Mark's eyes dipped. And then, he said, "By the amazing grace of God, I woke up." The words sounded strange in the fluorescent basement. Grace felt too bright for that room. Mark said it anyway.
"I sat up in bed like I'd been pulled out of water," he said. "I was in shock, terror. I didn't even have a category for what happened. I wasn't trying to be religious about it. I didn't know the Bible. I didn't know what scripture said about outer darkness or weeping or gnashing. I just knew it was real." He let out a shaky breath. "I thought I died in my sleep," he said. "I used to have sleep apnea. I used to stop breathing. People die like that. I always pushed it off. That night, I didn't push it off." He looked at Elias again, something pleading behind his steadiness. "I told my mom the next day," he said. "I didn't want to. I was embarrassed. I thought people would call me crazy, but it was too heavy to hold alone." He blinked, and finally a tear slipped free. She looked at me and said, "That sounds like hell." The word hell hung in the air like smoke. Mark wiped his face quickly, almost angry at the tears. "I tried to forget it," he said. "I went back to my life. I was scared, but I didn't repent. I didn't change. I wasn't ready to." He looked around the circle again, as if warning them against using fear as a substitute for surrender. "Fear can wake you up," he said, "but it doesn't keep you awake." Elias felt the truth of that in his bones. Mark continued, quieter now. "Years later, I read the Bible," he said, "and I hit a passage where Jesus talks about outer darkness, weeping, gnashing of teeth, and it was like the floor dropped out from under me again, because I knew where I'd been." He took another breath. "I asked God for confirmation," he said, "not because I needed proof to believe in hell, because I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind." He shook his head slowly. "Then I started hearing other testimonies, other people describing the same descent, the same darkness, hands reaching, the same terror, and that terrified me for a different reason." "What reason?" Elias asked softly. Mark's eyes lifted. "Because it meant it wasn't just me," he said. "It meant it wasn't my imagination. It meant God was warming people in ways we don't like." Silence again. He let the room hold Mark's words the way a church holds a hymn after the last note fades. Finally, Elias said, "Thank you." Mark nodded once. Elias looked at the circle. "I don't know why Ashford is seeing what it's seeing," he said. "I don't know why the dead are warning the living. I don't know why fear is walking through our town like it owns the place. But I do know this," Elias said. "Hell is not a story we tell to control people. It's not a fable we use to scare children. If it is real, then pretending it isn't does not make it less real." A kid spoke up from the far side of the circle, one of the youngest in the room by a mile. He was maybe 18, shoulders too tight like he'd been carrying stress in his bones. He hadn't said a word all night. He kept his hands folded in his lap and stared at the floor like he didn't trust his own eyes. "I'm Kenny. I'm from the other side of the tracks," he said, his voice thin, like it didn't want to leave his throat. "A friend from school said y'all were meeting and that the pastor was letting people talk." He glanced at the pastor as if asking permission to speak. Elias gave him a welcoming smile. "You're safe here. Take your time." Kenny swallowed. "Yes, thank you, sir. I didn't see my grandma in a mirror or nothing like that, but it happened to me this week." The room shifted. Even Mark turned slightly. "I went to sleep, I woke up, and I was there."
Kenny didn't say where at first. He didn't need to. The words sat behind his teeth like heat. "It was dark," he said, and his fingers tightened together. "Not normal dark. I'm serious. Dark like you're buried. And I was burning. I was screaming, but it wasn't coming out right because you couldn't. You couldn't talk." His eyes flicked up, then down again. You couldn't really breathe either. Like your chest was working, trying to inhale, and I don't know, it still wasn't enough. Like the air didn't belong to you. A woman made a small sound, half prayer. Kenny shook his head once. "I saw other people there," he said. "Not close. Not like you could grab somebody and say, 'Are you seeing this too?' You couldn't even think straight enough to talk. It was like everybody was being hit so hard, they didn't have room for words." He paused, searching for a way to describe what didn't want to be described. "It felt organized," he said quietly, "like torment had a system." Elias leaned forward without realizing it. Kenny's voice dropped. It was like things down there had their own person, like a toy, like somebody picked you. He breathed out, quick. And they could do whatever they wanted, as long as they wanted. His shoulders rose, then fell. And then I felt somebody behind me. That sentence tightened the whole circle. "I don't know how," Kenny said, "but my senses were still there. I knew something was behind me. So He lifted his hand a few inches, then let it drop, embarrassed by the motion. I turned, and there was a man. Not being tortured, not burning like everybody else, just there." Mark's jaw clenched. Kenny's eyes glassed, not from tears, but from the pressure of holding them back. "He smiled at me," Kenny said. "Not a real smile, a wrong one." He swallowed, and it was like he talked without sound, like he didn't need my ears, like he was talking to what was inside my head. Kenny nodded faintly, like he could feel everyone doubting and needed to answer it before they spoke. "I couldn't answer him," he said. "I couldn't even open my mouth. But I thought something at him, something angry, because I was scared and I didn't know what else to do." Kenny's voice thinned, and he answered my thought. Silence dropped so hard it felt physical. Kenny looked at Elias now. He said, "You can say whatever you want, but you're still down here." Kenny's hands trembled, and he kept smiling like it was funny, like I was entertainment. A man in the circle whispered, "Lord Jesus." Kenny's face tightened. Then he said my name, he whispered. Not like he read it off a paper, like he'd known it. Rina's mouth went tight. Kenny blinked hard. He said, "Your God can't help you now, Kenny." His breath hitched once, quick and ugly. Like he wanted me to believe there was no point praying, like he wanted me to stop reaching up. Elias stayed very still. He could feel the question in the room taking shape. And then, Kenny said, it got worse, because it wasn't just pain. It was my life. His voice cracked on the last word. "I started seeing stuff," he said. "Not like a movie, like it was being thrown at me. Things I did when I was a kid, things I did when I got older. Stuff I didn't even remember until it was right there in front of me, like evidence." He swallowed. "And it wasn't random. It was like my life was testifying against me." He shook his head slowly. "Not one big sin," he said. "Every little one. Every secret one. Every time I thought nobody saw." His eyes lifted, pleading now. "And the worst part is I knew I deserved judgment. That's what it felt like. Not just torture, judgment." Kenny dragged in a breath like he'd been underwater. "I don't know how it ended," he whispered. I just remember that man smiling and walking away. Kenny lifted one hand toward his face, hesitant, and then I felt something touch my face, like a hand. His fingers trembled, and I couldn't fight it. My eyes closed, and I woke up in my bed. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody seemed to trust the air. Kenny stared at the floor. I checked my phone, he said, voice raw. Checked the room, checked the TV. I didn't know if I was alive. I didn't know if I died and came back. He shook his head. It didn't feel like a dream. He finally looked up again, and his voice steadied just enough to land the point. If this week is making people see things, he said, then hear me. Don't play with it. Don't laugh at it. Don't think you're tough. He swallowed. Whatever that was, it knew me, and it wanted me to believe God couldn't reach me. Kenny's gaze flicked to Mark, then back to Elias. And if it can do that, he said, then it's not just trying to scare us, it's trying to shut our mouths. A man in a work jacket finally lifted his head. His eyes were red. Pastor, he said, voice rough, what if what we're seeing isn't them? What if it's something wearing them? The question landed in Elias like a stone. He didn't rush to answer. He didn't give the room a tidy line. He told the truth he had. I don't know, Elias said, but if something is mimicking the dead to speak to the living, that still leaves us with the same question. He looked around the circle. What do we do with the warning? Rinna's voice came out small. I smelled ash, she said. That's what made me believe I wasn't imagining it. It smelled like burned hair. A woman near her nodded hard. Same, she whispered. In my kitchen. Another man said, my mirror fogged up like someone breathed on it. A teenager in the circle, maybe 16, stared at the floor and said nothing. Elias saw his hands shaking anyway. Elias listened. He let each person speak what they could. He noticed the details that repeated like a pattern. Ash smell, cold air, voices that sounded wrong, warnings that used the same phrases, even in different mouths. He did not tell them they were all crazy. He did not tell them they were all fine. He did not tell them the world was normal when it clearly wasn't. When the meeting finally wound down, people rose slowly, like their bodies didn't want to leave the only room where their fear had been believed, understood, and validated. Elias approached Kenny and said gently, "Come back Friday. Don't be alone." Kenny nodded, but without a promise. Mark lingered at the bottom of the stairs. Elias walked with him. At the door, Mark looked back into the basement. "Whatever's happening in this town," he said, "it feels like a door." Elias felt the hairs rise on his arms. "A door to what?" Elias asked. Mark's eyes stayed on the empty chairs. "To the same place," he said. "Or to the edge of it." Elias swallowed. "Then we don't treat it like a rumor," he said. Mark nodded once. "No," he said. "We treat it like a second chance." They stepped out into the Tennessee night. The air was cooler after the storm, and the trees stood black against a sky scattered with stars. Somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a distant truck groaned along the highway. Somewhere closer, a dog barked again and then fell silent. Elias locked the church door, and as the latch clicked into place, he remembered Mrs. Hanley's report. The click of a latch, a voice saying, "Turn back." He looked at the road stretching away from the church, disappearing into the darkness between the trees. Ashford was still Ashford, but it no longer felt like a town. It felt like a threshold.